Thank you everybody for joining. Proceed Group, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about legacy data and legacy systems. So want to try and put it today in the context of transformation strategy, because we see so many of the customers we speak to are working through major programs now, whether it's looking at a cloud migration, or whether it's looking at an S4HANA program, a RISE with SAP, a broader overall transformation program, and within those, there should be some consideration of what you can do with your legacy data and legacy systems. Otherwise, you're really leaving quite a bit of an opportunity to cut costs, ensure that you're compliant where you need to be, speed up migrations. Now you're leaving those opportunities behind, and so really wanted to share some experiences we've got and some of the things to think about today, and see if that can be of a little bit of value to you. So we're going to talk very briefly about Proceed and who we are, in case any of you don't know us. A bit about some thoughts about the challenges with digital transformation in terms of legacy, and then come on to some of the business drivers and business case for doing something about it. A bit of a view of what a project could look like. We'll touch on a product, and then some ideas on possible next steps if you want to go down that path. Okay, so Proceed, who are Proceed? So I think some of you certainly know us very well, but for those that haven't dealt with us, we are a very specialist SAP partner. We've been in business for over 20 years now, and it's all been very focused around SAP data management, and in particular these areas of archiving, thinking about live SAP systems, decommissioning, whether it's SAP or non-SAP systems, and we're very good at content management as well. As it says, we're a gold partner. We do services on behalf of SAP, and we're working with a lot of other organizations actually that, in the same way pretty much as SAP, bring us in to do projects around archiving, decommissioning, content management at the right times in the engagements that they're driving. So that's broadly where we fit. We've done lots of customer projects around the world, a lot in Europe, a lot in the USA, and smattering in all sorts of other parts of the world as well, and lots of offices around the world to support all of that good work. Okay. So in terms of customer base, we've worked with a very good set of large organizations. Generally tends to be large and mid-sized to the very large organizations that we work with. Good spread around the world, good spread across industry, because we find that to some extent the challenges that we're helping with are very much cross industry. They are around how you best manage SAP systems, but we do need to bring in industry specific knowledge in quite a few specific cases, and we'll touch on that in a minute. Okay. To give you an idea of some of the projects we've done around legacy data, there's quite a few going on at the moment. Some of the ones we completed a while ago included this one, the top, which is a Canadian organization where we decommissioned these 4 large SAP systems and deleted that enormous amount of data prior to the divestiture of a subsidiary. And sometimes that's where legacy data projects come from. The pharmaceutical one was a very well-known large pharmaceutical who'd acquired another business, and there was a program to transition that business's systems onto the core SAP systems. So we helped them first of all with their SAP systems that they wanted to decommission, that were no longer required, and how they handle the data from those. And when that has gone well, they then asked us to do the same thing with these 55 JD Edwards systems. And we then worked through that program and develop what we call the factory model, as a kind of efficient way of delivering these kinds of projects when there are a lot of systems to do. And that works very well for anything from say 4 systems upwards. And we also trained them and their in-house systems integrator, who could then take that forward, and they then got a program to work through additional systems that they've got. So that worked very well, and SAP told us that was the largest project that they were aware of that was done with their technology, their ILM technology for decommissioning. And then again, quite recently, we've done this project with a UK bank that decommissioned a couple of systems and helped them with their data from those systems. And right now, we've done projects with a large organization in the Nordics, logistics company. We're doing projects with a rail company in the Netherlands. It's going very well. Doing projects with a roofing business in the UK. And there's quite a long list more, but we've really seen a strong uptick in the interest in these sorts of projects around how you handle your legacy data. I think really on the basis of a number of areas, but a number of causes, but certainly as there's been a bit of a resurgence in transformation programs post-COVID, as there's been a real focus on costs post-COVID, it seems to be very much the time to go and address this legacy data. So coming back to Proceed and how we work, what we think is really critical for these kinds of projects is to have a broader view than just the technology. Okay? So we understand some of the solutions very well. We've used them a lot of times, and we can run the project. But what we found is critical for these kinds of projects is a broader understanding. So whether it's a broader understanding of the industry requirements that we just touched on a minute ago. So some industries, of course, you're just going to need to look at some finance data, some potentially operational, some sales, some material data, and it's fairly standard that you might need to keep that for say 7 years. But in other industries, if you're building nuclear power stations or you're making medicines, you need to keep your data for much, much longer. So having an understanding of the retention rules and requirements, whether it's by industry or it could be by country, for varying kinds of data is really important. And that's something that we know quite a bit about now. We've done a lot of projects, and something that we find is really important to engage on with the right people in your organization, whether it's maybe some of the business owners of the various kinds of data, potentially also with audit teams or legal teams, to make sure that those rules are really clearly defined before you go any further. So there's quite a lot more we think to these kinds of projects, and really having that industry view, having that understanding of data and the requirements around data is something that you really need to think about before you make a start. So coming back to our subject matter, digital transformation. I mean, digital transformation is a very broad topic. As I said earlier, there can be a lot of programs under that banner, whether it's overall just digitization of processes that weren't digital before, obviously, just from the most basic definition, but that can be broadened out into all sorts of SAP related and potentially S4HANA or IoT related around the edge type programs. Could encompass cloud migrations. It's really quite a broadly used topic where we look primarily at these kind of 3 areas we've laid out here on the right. But that is typically looking at the new functionality that needs to be thought about within the digital transformation. And often there will be a set of legacy systems in place, or potentially more arising as a result of that digital transformation program. So in terms of what we need to think about when it comes to legacy systems and the digital transformation, I mean, the first thing to think about is really what matters here is the data. Okay? If the data didn't matter, you could turn the systems off and life would be simple. But it's all about the data and the fact that typically you'll need to keep some of that data for good reasons, such as your auditors might want to see that data. You might have legal reasons for keeping it. As we said, there can often be audit or legal reasons to keep basic finance data in the UK for 7 years. And those rules vary slightly by country, but there can also be regulatory reasons as well if you're in that kind of industry, where again you might need to keep data for much, much longer. Now, equally, there's going to be some ongoing business reasons. So if we think about scenarios where you're implementing a new system, let's call it an S4HANA system, and you've got some legacy data which is still elsewhere, maybe in an ECC system or something else. Often not all of the data is taken across in the migration, and you still need to access the legacy data from these legacy systems, and then and that can be required either for sort of a BI view of historical trends, whether it's we're looking at sales or purchases or whatever that could be. But there can equally be some current, say, manufacturing requirements where it needs to look back at historical data. There can be a number of areas where that historical data is still relevant to the business, but is not in your new shiny system. So very important to keep this legacy data for all of these various reasons. And as I said here, retention times, you need to be thinking about the long term. So we know there are certainly scenarios where certain kinds of data need to be kept for 30, 40, 50 years. We know in China there's a requirement which is effectively 100 years. So in terms of both the requirement to keep it and knowing you have to do so, but also thinking about where you're going to keep it and the technology that's going to be able to help you keep this kind of data for that kind of long period is all things to bear in mind. Okay. Then if we come back to sources of legacy systems, well, we've really seen them come from all sorts of places. So there, of course, is a natural IT lifecycle where you're bringing out new applications, and there's going to be a previous generation application left behind. Mergers and acquisitions. So we see many organizations who've got 20, 30, 40, 50 legacy systems because they bought other organizations, and there's a whole set of systems there where they've taken some of that data and put it into their current system, but they've still got lots of legacy. For example, and then another example would be I'd say a greenfield migration. So if you're going to S4HANA, you're implementing that as a greenfield, as a new system, taking maybe 1 or 2 years data into that system, but the remains of your data, all the legacy data stays in the ECC systems left behind. Again, we're just creating more and more legacy systems now as we go. So if we think about this, then in the past, it's been less of an issue. So often organizations where you had your own data center in place, maybe you virtualize some of these legacy systems, but there's not been such a drive to really decommission them. Typically, there's been lots of other things that have been a priority. Budgets may have been done in such a way that it was not that visible, or somebody else's budget, or whatever. But there's ways where it's not been driven to the top of the priority pile. And if it's just a few years or fairly recently since the application became a legacy application, then there's going to be skills in the business to help manage those systems and to continue to get the access to the information that the business needs. But if we start to think about some of the challenges around all of this, then as we go forward, is the application still supported? We're dealing with organizations that have got truly ancient SAP systems back to 4.6 or version 3. Clearly they're not supported anymore, and there's plenty of non-SAP examples as well. That may give you some audit issues, but also give you support issues. If we equally think about our security patches available or probably not, then again that might give you some broader causes for concern as well. Then again, as you think about keeping these systems, if you wanted to keep them as is, but your hardware starts to fall behind or to break over time, then are you going to be able to get compatible hardware and all the other bits of middleware, software, operating system that's required to support that specific version of the application, which all of those in itself will be older. Then we can look at the skills question. So if you've got some people that know these older systems, then how long are they going to be still working? Are they going to still continue to want to have to focus on these systems? So skills over time will become more and more of an issue. Then if you think about going forward, if you wanted to keep the application running on the legacy system, how easy is it to move that to cloud? I mean, if we look at the compatibility information that the major cloud vendors put out, it's quite easily accessible. Certainly, Azure, AWS, Google publish this very readily. It's typically the latest versions of operating systems and databases that are supported. So again, we're dealing with legacy applications. There may be a mismatch there, and I don't know anybody that wants to go and do a major migration program around a legacy application to bring them onto current versions so they can be put into the cloud. So that can be something that's quite a constraint. And we deal with organizations that are trying to move everything out of a data center so they can do what they call a data center exit and have all of their systems in the cloud. but these legacy systems are holding them back. Okay, so then if we start to think about, well, what are the ways forward? And over the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of different ways forward. From one extreme of, well, let's just keep these systems, maybe virtualize them. That's an option, but you're still got most of these challenges to address. You're still paying a lot of maintenance for those applications, and the issue is really not going away. You really can't just turn them off and hope, because you will have some people coming after you with questions about audit and legal requirements, and that's not really going to work. So what we see is a number of options being suggested, and organizations thinking about can we just take this data and move it into our favorite place to put data, whether it's a data lake or a data warehouse. And again, the migration of the data is easy. The thing to be thought about is how are you going to make use of that data going forward, because your end users want to be able to look at it, and they don't want to be able to look at underlying tables. Okay? Now, when we think about the SAP data model, it's complicated and it's not in the database. So even something like a purchase order, the data is spread across 8+ tables. You can't just look at the individual tables and make any sense of it. So we're coming back to really needing a solution that understands the data model, particularly for SAP, but also to some extent for non-SAP systems as well, as being really critical to taking these kind of systems forward as part of a digital transformation program. So I'm going to go very quickly through some of these because we've got very little time, but some of the business drivers, obviously cost and risk are really key. Environmental is becoming more and more of a priority for many organizations. Keeping legacy systems going is really counter to that. And then again, the business case generally you find it's less of an issue. It's quite well understood. There's usually pretty high costs for keeping these systems and pretty significant risks for keeping legacy systems in place. So usually quite a quick discussion. And if we come and look at what typically happens in a project, there will need to be some sort of assessment for your landscape, understand what systems we're talking about, what are the underlying technologies. It's quite a broad set of things you really need to think about there. And then that business case, again, usually we find pretty straightforward, and then starting to think about some sort of high-level plan. But when we actually get into the execution, again, I touched on this earlier, but it's really important at the beginning stages to get involvement from stakeholders across the business, potentially the business owners of the data, from potentially audit, legal, and so on, to really work through things like your data retention rules, to work through what kinds of reporting end users will need from any sort of decommissioning solution, and for this all to be done up front. Okay? Then we move on to things like getting the data extracted, and there's a good piece of work as well initially about exactly what data we're talking about, and that's a big subject in itself. Getting reports set up, getting the solution knowledge transferred, doing a good UAT with the users, all needs to be completed and signed off before you can go back and turn off those legacy systems. So just touch on one option we have. So we've done work with a number of solutions over the years, and having done that, we developed this solution in-house called Cella. So having seen what's really required in the marketplace, we decided to develop this. It was very much an all-in-one solution that can do all of these steps. So something that can extract the data, store it, provide a set of reports about it, and have the things you need around there, like the right security model is often critical, and things like retention management rules, so that you can define rules that say different classes of data, whether it's quite a high level way of defining this or quite a granular way of defining it, and for these different kinds of data, what are the retention rules for each of them. So you're going to keep certain data for 3 more years, some for 10 more years, whatever, but equally have functionality like legal hold if you've got any ongoing issues that need to be addressed. So this is a solution we put in place. We're very pleased that it's going pretty well. Lots of customers have taken it, and indeed some other organizations are choosing to use this as their preferred solution and promote it as well. So very pleased with that. And as it says, it's now something we've now got a SaaS solution for, because that's just what nearly every customer has asked for. In the last few minutes, one thing we can do if you want us to, in terms of how to help, is really coming back to that first stage of how do you assess where you are. I think there's things to think about broader way in your organization, but in terms of the specific systems, we have an assessment for an SAP system, which really lets you understand the system in a bit of depth. It lets us get a view of kind of what modules are being used, what level of customization has been used, and that lets us give you back an estimate of what a project would look like, and also what the size and scale of a Proceed Cella solution would look like. So that seems to be something that organizations find quite helpful. In terms of other systems like non-SAP systems, then we can do more of a simple assessment process of indexing which systems you've got, what are the underlying technologies, what do you know about them in terms of the customization and usage and reports requirements. And again, that way build up a picture of the requirements. So that's something that we're very happy to help with if you're interested. So in the last 5 minutes, I will say that was quite a whistle-stop tour through some of the challenges of legacy systems in major project environments. But hopefully that was helpful. Michelle, let me ask, were there any questions at this stage?
Thanks, Robert. Yes, we do have a couple. Please, everyone else, if you feel you want to ask anything, we'll open the floor in just 1 minute, just after we go through these. The first one is, we are working on a cloud strategy. Do you work with hyperscalers on how to handle legacy systems?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, we do find that hyperscalers are actually quite interested in helping with this. As we said, we've got, on the one hand, there's significant issues in terms of just taking these applications as is into the cloud. You really don't, you will find they're not compatible and don't want to do a migration. But by using one of these technologies that lets you extract the data and put it into a modern application, then we get rid of those issues. And then find that hyperscalers are very interested in helping you bring them in. And then we can look at things like with their expertise, what's the right class of storage to have, because they offer very varying types of storage. And typically with legacy systems, we know there's going to be certain pattern of usage over the years. So you need to keep the data, but the usage of that data will decline over time, and there'll be only occasional requirements for access. So we can put the applications on quite cheap storage, and really bring the cost down while still making sure there's still access available. Okay, was there another one, Michelle? You said there was two, I think.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah. How would you recommend we start thinking about plans for our legacy systems?
We could certainly help with this assessment. And I think before you even think about something like that, as part of a broader program, it's very important to understand exactly where you start from. So, what is the business view? Do you have support in the business for doing something about these legacy? Are the challenges of these legacy systems understood? Do people understand that you can't just take the data and dump it somewhere that you think you can go and access it? That those things won't work. So there's going to be is there an understanding of some of the challenges first of all, and that some of the simplistic solutions don't work? So we need to think about this. But equally, what are the policies and practices in place? So are the retention rules well understood? And coming back to the business case, so high level, is there an understanding of what these legacy systems are costing your business, and looking at the broader context for that? So there might be infrastructure costs, hardware and software. There could be people costs, networking costs. It might be a very broad cost if that's the one thing keeping a data center open. So working out what are all the associated costs, and does that look like there's an easy business case? And as we said, we generally find it is very easy. So potentially we can help with a broader view, and we've got a kind of calculator, simple calculator put together for the business case and these kinds of projects, which can just help uncover the multiple systems that there are. Even if we think about an SAP system, it's not just that system. Then there's going to be behind it, a QA system, a pre-prod system, some development environments, and that all multiplies up to being a pretty substantial cost for a legacy system if that's still sitting there. thank you for joining. As I said, it was very much a whistle-stop tour. So if anybody wants to follow up in a bit more detail, we're very happy to do so. Otherwise, look out for the other webinars we've got coming up. And thank you for joining today. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Thanks all. Bye.